frozen, beaten, and without clothes. She crawled to his cabin, and he let her live like a queen. The woman moved slowly, her body aching from every step. She had no warm clothes, only the thin layers she had been wearing, now soaked and frozen by the harsh weather. Her hands and feet were numb, her lips blue, and her eyes half closed against the snow and wind. She had been walking for what felt like hours, though she had lost count. Each step was a battle, each movement a test of her will. Her mind was exhausted, but her heart refused to give up. She thought about the life she had before this moment. A life that had been ordinary, filled with small joys and familiar comforts. She remembered the warmth of a home, the laughter that had once echoed in a room, and the safety she had always taken for granted. Now all of that seemed like a distant memory. The snow and wind had taken everything from her, leaving her with only one goal: to survive. The woman's journey had not been easy. She had faced dangers she could never have imagined, and yet she had kept moving forward. Her body bore the marks of hardship, her skin bruised and scraped from the journey. She stumbled over rocks hidden beneath the snow, fell into icy water, and felt the sharp bite of frost on every exposed inch of her body. Each time she fell, she forced herself to get up again, her mind repeating a single thought. She could not stop now. She had to keep going. The cold was relentless. Her fingers and toes had begun to lose feeling entirely, and her breath came in ragged gasps. Every movement required an enormous effort, but she forced herself forward, step by painful step. Her eyes scanned the horizon for any sign of shelter, any sign of life, anything that could give her hope. All she could see were the endless white plains and the dark, distant shapes of bare trees. It was easy to feel lost and small in a world so vast and unforgiving. Her mind wandered as she moved. She thought about the people she had known, the people who had once cared for her. She remembered faces and voices, both kind and cruel, and the lessons she had learned from each encounter. In these memories, she found strength. She reminded herself that she had survived before and she could survive again. She could not let the cold or fear take her. Survival had become her only focus, her only goal, and she clung to it with everything she had. Hours passed, or maybe minutes, she could not tell. Time had lost its meaning in the frozen landscape. She felt herself growing weaker, her body struggling to respond to her mind's commands. Her legs trembled with fatigue, her arms ached, and she felt a hollowness in her stomach that reminded her she had not eaten in a long time. But still, she did not stop. She did not let despair take root. She focused only on one thing: moving forward, finding safety, finding warmth. At one point, she collapsed to the snow, unable to lift herself for several moments. Her body shivered uncontrollably, and she felt a sharp pain in her chest from the cold and exhaustion. She thought she might give in, thought she might stop, but a quiet voice inside her mind would not allow it. "You can survive this," it whispered. "Keep going. One step at a time, don't give up." She forced herself to crawl forward, dragging her body across the frozen ground. Every inch she moved felt like a victory, every small progress a triumph over the harsh world around her. She remembered learning as a child to never give up, to always find a way through difficulties. That lesson, learned long ago, had never felt more real than in this moment. She used every ounce of her strength, her every thought, to keep moving. She pressed her face against the snow to shield herself from the wind, and she pushed her hands and knees forward, leaving a trail in the white expanse. Her body screamed in protest, but her mind refused to surrender. As the sun began to set, the landscape grew even more menacing. Shadows stretched across the snow, and the temperature dropped further. Her breath became visible in thick clouds, freezing quickly in the air before dissipating. Each breath was a struggle, each movement a reminder of how vulnerable she was. Yet, even as she felt herself weakening, a flicker of hope appeared in the distance. A dark shape, barely visible against the white snow, caught her attention. It was small and simple, but it was something. Her heart surged with cautious hope. She forced herself to crawl faster, to push through the last of her exhaustion. Every step toward that shape felt like a step toward life itself. The idea of shelter, of warmth, of safety gave her the strength to continue. She did not know who or what might be there, but she knew that she had to reach it. Survival meant taking risks, even when she was terrified. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she reached the edge of a small clearing. Before her stood a cabin, modest but solid, with smoke curling gently from its chimney. The sight of it filled her with a warmth she had almost forgotten. She could see windows that reflected the fading sunlight, and she imagined the warmth of a fire inside, the comfort of shelter and food. Her body, nearly frozen and completely exhausted, gave a final push of energy as she dragged herself toward the door. She reached the cabin and knocked weakly, her hand trembling uncontrollably. There was a moment of silence, and she felt her heart sink, thinking she might have come too late. But then a door opened, and a man appeared. He was older, strong-looking, with kind eyes that immediately noticed her condition. He did not ask questions, did not hesitate. He simply reached out and helped her inside, guiding her to a warm fire. For the first time in hours or days, she felt safe. She felt the cold slowly leave her body as she sat by the fire, wrapped in blankets, and sipped warm water offered by the man. Her body began to relax, though the fatigue was still overwhelming. For the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to breathe, to rest, to feel hope. She realized that she had survived the frozen wasteland, and that kindness could still exist in a harsh world. As she sat there, recovering slowly, she began to understand that this was not just a physical rescue. It was a turning point. She had faced the worst of the cold, the exhaustion, and the despair, and she had made it. She had proven to herself that she could endure, that she could survive against impossible odds. And now, with help, she could begin to heal, not just her body, but her mind and spirit as well. The woman's journey through the snow had been a test of strength, courage, and determination. She had faced fear and hardship that would have defeated many others, but she had refused to give up. Her survival was not just a matter of chance. It was the result of her willpower, her persistence, and her refusal to surrender. And now, sitting by the fire in the warmth of the cabin, she allowed herself to hope again. The night fell outside, but inside there was light, warmth, and safety. She felt her first real sense of relief in what had felt like an eternity. Though she had suffered greatly, she had made it through. She had endured the cold, the pain, and the fear. And in the quiet of the cabin, with a kind stranger offering shelter and care, she began to understand that this was the beginning of something new, a chance to recover, to heal, and to reclaim her life. She did not yet know what the future would hold, but for the first time she dared to imagine it. She dared to imagine warmth without pain, safety without fear, and life without constant struggle. The snowstorm had been fierce, but she had been fiercer. And now she would rest, gather her strength, and take the next steps toward a life she had thought impossible only hours ago. Even in the darkest, coldest moments, she had survived. And survival was only the first step toward a brighter tomorrow. The cabin was small but warm. Its wooden walls were thick, protecting its occupants from the cold wind outside. The fire in the hearth crackled softly, casting flickering shadows across the room. The woman sank into a chair near the fire, shivering slightly as the warmth began to seep into her frozen body. Her limbs ached, her muscles were stiff, and every joint protested as she moved. Yet she felt a sense of relief she had not known in days. She was safe. For the first time, the word safe felt real. The man who had helped her was quiet but kind. He moved carefully around the cabin, tending to small chores with a calm efficiency. He brought her warm water, blankets, and some simple food, bread, soup, and a little cheese. She hesitated at first, unsure if she could trust anyone after the hardships she had endured. But hunger and exhaustion soon overcame her fear, and she accepted the food with trembling hands. As she ate slowly, she watched him. He did not seem impatient or judgmental. He worked quietly, occasionally glancing at her to make sure she was all right. There was something comforting about his presence. She realized that kindness could exist even in a world that had shown her so much cruelty. It was strange, almost unbelievable, to feel safe again, but the warmth of the fire and the simple gestures of care convinced her that this was real. Once she had eaten, the man suggested she rest. He led her to a small room at the back of the cabin, where a bed was neatly made with warm blankets. She hesitated at first, unsure if she deserved comfort, unsure if she could allow herself to relax. But her body could not protest any longer. She climbed into the bed and let the blankets wrap her completely. The warmth was overwhelming, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to sleep without fear. When she awoke, the light of morning streamed softly through the window. The storm outside had passed, leaving the world sparkling under a fresh layer of snow. Her body still ached, but she felt a renewed sense of strength. The man was already awake, moving quietly around the cabin. He smiled at her as she appeared in the doorway, offering a nod of reassurance. It was a small gesture, but it carried more meaning than words could express. Over the next few days, she began to regain her strength. The man provided her with food and warmth, but he also gave her space to recover at her own pace. He never pressed her to talk about what had happened or to explain herself. Instead, he simply offered companionship and safety. It was a new experience for her, someone who did not judge, someone who did not demand, someone who simply cared. Slowly, she began to explore the cabin. She discovered small comforts she had almost forgotten: cozy blankets, a warm hearth, shelves of books, and jars of preserved food. The man showed her how to make a fire, how to cook simple meals, and how to tend to the small garden outside, which was covered now by snow but promised life when spring came. Every small lesson was a reminder that life could be gentle, that the world could offer kindness instead of only hardship. She also began to talk, at first only a little in quiet whispers. She told him her name and he offered his in return. They shared small stories about their lives, their pasts, and their experiences. She found comfort in his listening, in the patience with which he received her words. There was no rush, no pressure, just understanding. It was a stark contrast to the world she had left behind, a world that had been harsh and unforgiving. Her trust grew slowly, like a fragile plant in the snow. Each day brought small victories. She laughed quietly at something he said, a sound that surprised her because she had thought she had forgotten how to laugh. She began to ask questions about the world outside, about the seasons, about life beyond the cabin. And he answered patiently, never condescending, always respectful. These small interactions became a foundation, a bridge connecting her back to the possibility of a normal, safe life. Even as she recovered, she could not forget the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the cold, the fear, and the exhaustion. Those memories were still painful, but in the warmth of the cabin, they became lessons in resilience. She realized that she had survived against impossible odds, that she had endured when many would have given up. And now, with help and care, she could begin to heal, not just physically, but emotionally as well. The man did not pry into her past, but she began to share it in small pieces voluntarily. She spoke of her family, her childhood, and the dreams she once had. She shared the hardships she had faced, the moments of fear and the struggles to survive. And as she spoke, she felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Sharing her story in a safe environment was like letting a small beam of light into a dark room. Each word, each sentence made her feel stronger, more human, more alive. In return, he shared stories of his own life, not all, but enough to show her that he too had faced challenges. He spoke of solitude, of work in the forest, and of the small joys that made life meaningful. Through these conversations, she realized that people could face hardship and still find ways to live with dignity and peace. She began to see that life could offer both struggle and kindness, often intertwined in ways she had never imagined. The days passed, and with each one she grew stronger. Her body regained its warmth, her muscles their strength, and her mind its clarity. She learned to cook simple meals, to fetch water from the well, and to care for herself in ways she had forgotten. Each skill was a step toward independence, each task a reminder that she was capable of more than she had believed. And though she had come to the cabin as a broken and weary woman, she was slowly becoming whole again. Beyond physical recovery, something deeper was happening. She was learning to trust again, to believe that the world could contain kindness and compassion. The man's quiet presence, his patience, and his willingness to help without expecting anything in return were teaching her a powerful lesson. That people could care for others without seeking gain, that goodness could exist even in the most unlikely places. This realization filled her with a sense of hope she had thought was lost forever. She began to contribute to life in the cabin, helping with chores, tidying the space, and even arranging small touches that made it feel like home. It was her way of expressing gratitude, of participating in the life that had welcomed her. The man encouraged her gently, showing that her presence mattered, that her actions could make a difference. Each small contribution became a symbol of her recovery, a sign that she was no longer just surviving, she was living. One evening, as they sat by the fire after a day of simple work, she realized how far she had come. The snowstorm that had left her helpless, the cold that had numbed her body, and the fear that had consumed her mind were no longer in control. She had emerged from the darkness into warmth, trust, and care. And she knew deep inside that she had not just survived. The journey had changed her, strengthened her, and opened the door to a new life. She looked at the man, a quiet smile forming on her lips. He nodded, understanding without words. In that moment, there was a mutual recognition of resilience, of human goodness, and of the power of compassion. She had been broken and battered by life, but here she had found healing. The cabin was more than a shelter. It was a place of recovery, trust, and hope. And she was ready to take the next steps, learning not just to survive, but to live fully with courage and dignity. Though the world outside was still harsh and cold, she no longer feared it in the same way. She had found a sanctuary, and within it, a teacher, a friend, and a guide. She understood that the road ahead would not always be easy, but she had regained her strength, her trust, and her hope. And in the quiet, warm light of the cabin, she began to believe that life could once again be beautiful, even after hardship. The snow continued to fall outside, but inside there was laughter, warmth, and conversation. The woman had taken her first steps toward recovery, not alone, but with the support of someone who had seen her struggle and offered nothing but kindness. Each day, she learned something new, each moment a small victory. She had come to the cabin broken, weary, and afraid, but she was beginning to rise again, stronger, wiser, and ready to embrace life once more. Days passed quietly in the cabin, yet each day was filled with subtle changes that transformed her in ways she had not expected. Her body had regained much of its strength. Her muscles no longer ached as sharply, and her hands and feet had thawed and become nimble once more. But even more remarkable was the change in her mind and spirit. The fear and despair that had weighed so heavily upon her were slowly lifting, replaced by a cautious sense of peace. She realized that this was the first time in a long while she had felt truly safe. The man, patient and gentle, continued to support her without asking for anything in return. He did not rush her to talk about her past or to reveal the details of her hardships. Instead, he simply provided a presence that was steady and reassuring. He would start small conversations, asking her thoughts on simple things, the beauty of the snow outside, the taste of a new dish, or the way a bird sang in the trees. She found herself beginning to speak more, sharing small details of her life that she had kept locked away. At first, her words were hesitant, broken by long pauses. She spoke of her childhood memories, the smell of baking bread in her family kitchen, and the laughter that had once filled her home. These were small fragments of life that had seemed insignificant at the time, but now they became bridges to the world she had almost forgotten. Each memory she shared made her feel lighter, as if some invisible weight was lifting from her shoulders. And he listened. He never interrupted or judged. He simply listened, offering gentle encouragement with a nod or a smile. Trust grew slowly, like a fragile flower in early spring. She began to understand that it was possible to rely on someone without fear, to feel comfort in another person's presence without suspicion. The man treated her with a quiet dignity that made her feel respected and valued. He would ask if she needed help, offer guidance when necessary, but always allowed her space to make her own decisions. This respect gave her a sense of control that she had not felt in a long time, and it was healing in a way that warmth and food alone could never achieve. One morning, she awoke to the gentle light filtering through the cabin windows. The snow outside glistened under the soft sunlight, and the world seemed peaceful. She noticed that the man had already started a fire in the hearth, and the scent of fresh bread filled the room. She felt a wave of gratitude and warmth rise within her, realizing that this simple act of care was a gesture of trust and respect. She thanked him quietly, and he responded with a smile, as if to say that no thanks were necessary. As days turned into weeks, she began to explore the small routines of cabin life. She learned to cook simple meals, to sweep the floor, and to fetch water from the well. Each task was a small victory, a demonstration of her growing independence. She realized that even though she had come to the cabin broken and weary, she was now becoming capable again. Every action, no matter how small, reminded her of her resilience and her ability to adapt. Beyond physical recovery, her emotional world was transforming. She found herself able to smile and even laugh at moments of humor, something she had thought she had lost forever. The man's gentle teasing, the playful flicker of the firelight, and the quiet rhythm of life in the cabin all contributed to this change. Laughter, she realized, was not just an expression of joy. It was a sign of life returning, of her spirit healing from the trauma she had endured. One evening, as they sat together after dinner, she began to share more about her journey. She spoke of the cold, the fear, and the exhaustion she had faced before finding the cabin. She described crawling through the snow, her body battered and bruised, and the hopelessness that had threatened to consume her. As she spoke, she felt tears rise, not out of sadness, but as a release of the pain she had carried alone for so long. He listened quietly, offering only the presence of his understanding, letting her voice carry her pain into the warmth of the cabin. Through these conversations, she discovered the importance of expressing feelings. For so long, she had kept her pain hidden, believing that speaking of it would make her weak or unworthy. But here, she learned that vulnerability could be a source of strength. By sharing her story, she was reclaiming parts of herself that had been lost or suppressed. Each word spoken aloud was a step toward healing. Each tear shed a release of the trauma that had weighed her down. The man, too, shared small pieces of his life. He spoke of solitude in the forest, of challenges he had faced, and of the moments of beauty that had kept him grounded. These stories were not grand or dramatic, but they carried a quiet wisdom. She realized that life was made up of small moments, each one capable of teaching lessons about resilience, patience, and the power of kindness. Listening to him, she began to understand that hardship was not the end of life, but often the beginning of a new chapter filled with growth and learning. Their relationship grew stronger, not through grand gestures, but through daily interactions that built trust and mutual respect. He showed her how to prepare simple meals, how to gather firewood safely, and how to care for the small animals that lived near the cabin. In turn, she helped with chores, tidied the space, and even suggested small improvements to make the cabin more comfortable. Each action, small though it might seem, strengthened their bond and reinforced her sense of belonging. She also began to reconnect with her own thoughts and dreams. The isolation of the cabin, combined with the safety and patience of the man, gave her the mental space to reflect. She thought about the life she wanted to build, the goals she had once set aside, and the person she wished to become. Slowly, she began to imagine a future beyond mere survival, a future filled with dignity, purpose, and happiness. These thoughts brought a sense of hope she had not felt in years, a quiet confidence that she could shape her destiny once again. One particularly cold evening, as snow fell gently outside, she found herself sitting by the fire, writing in a small notebook the man had given her. She wrote about her feelings, her journey, and her reflections on life. Writing became a new outlet for her emotions, a way to process experiences and clarify her thoughts. Each page filled was a testament to her resilience, a record of her growth and healing. She felt empowered, realizing that her voice, her story mattered and deserved to be expressed. Through all of this, she learned that healing was not linear. Some days were easier than others, and moments of fear or sadness would occasionally resurface. But she no longer felt alone when these emotions came. She had the man's quiet support, the warmth of the cabin, and her own inner strength to rely on. She understood that recovery was a journey, one that required patience, courage, and trust. And with each passing day, she became more confident in her ability to navigate this journey. One morning, as she helped him carry firewood from the pile outside, she paused to look at the landscape. The snow-covered trees glistened in the morning light, and the quiet of the forest was peaceful. She felt a profound sense of gratitude, not just for the man who had helped her, but for the chance to live, to heal, and to begin again. Life, she realized, was fragile and beautiful, and even after the darkest moments, there was the possibility of warmth, trust, and renewal. Her confidence grew not only through physical tasks, but also through her interactions with the man. She began to make decisions independently, offering ideas about meals, chores, and even small repairs around the cabin. He welcomed her suggestions, treating them with respect and consideration. This validation was empowering, reinforcing her belief in her own abilities. She realized that she was no longer merely surviving. She was actively participating in her life, shaping her environment, and contributing meaningfully to the cabin they shared. As the days continued, their bond deepened. It was a quiet bond, built on trust, respect, and shared experiences rather than grand gestures or dramatic moments. They spoke openly, laughed together, and supported one another in ways that were simple yet profound. She understood that this connection was a rare gift, a reminder that human kindness and empathy could transform even the most difficult circumstances. She also began to dream again. The cabin, once a refuge from despair, became a place where she could envision a brighter future. She imagined traveling, learning new skills, and building a life filled with purpose and happiness. These dreams were tentative at first, fragile in their hopefulness, but they grew stronger with each passing day. She realized that she was no longer defined by fear or past suffering. Instead, she was defined by resilience, courage, and the ability to embrace life once more. By the end of this period, she had transformed in ways that were subtle but profound. Her body had regained strength, her mind clarity, and her heart trust. She had learned the power of compassion, the importance of patience, and the value of human connection. The cabin, once simply a shelter, had become a place of growth, learning, and renewal. And she had learned that even in the face of immense hardship, it was possible to heal, to trust, and to hope for a brighter future. The woman awoke one morning with a feeling she had not experienced in a long time, a sense of possibility. The cabin had become a place of safety, warmth, and learning, and each day brought new challenges that strengthened her body, mind, and spirit. She stretched, feeling the comfort of her muscles after a long night of rest, and noticed the sunlight spilling through the windows, casting a golden glow over the wooden floor. It was a simple beauty, yet it filled her with a quiet joy. Over the past weeks, she had regained her physical strength through daily chores, walks in the forest, and caring for herself. She could now move with confidence, chop firewood efficiently, cook meals without assistance, and tend to the small garden outside. Every task, once exhausting, had become a way to assert her independence. With each accomplishment, she felt a growing sense of pride. She was no longer a passive survivor, she was an active participant in her own life. The man, always patient and encouraging, continued to guide her subtly. He did not rush her, nor did he impose rules. Instead, he offered advice when necessary and praised her efforts sincerely. His encouragement was not loud or overwhelming, but steady, like the gentle flow of a river. It was this quiet support that helped her build confidence in herself. She realized that true strength came not only from physical ability, but from the courage to make choices and trust in her own judgment. As she grew stronger, she began to take initiative in the cabin. She rearranged the shelves to make food more accessible, organized the woodpile for easier use, and even cleaned the fireplace to make the room cozier. Each small improvement gave her a sense of accomplishment and reminded her that she could shape her surroundings to her liking. These tasks were more than chores, they were expressions of her regained autonomy and creativity. Her emotional growth continued alongside her physical and practical development. The woman had learned to manage her feelings of fear, sadness, and doubt. She discovered that writing in her notebook helped her process her emotions, turning confusion into clarity. She also began to express gratitude regularly, both to herself and to the man who had cared for her. Gratitude became a daily practice, a reminder that life still held kindness and beauty despite past hardships. One day, as she worked in the small garden outside the cabin, the man watched her quietly. She was planting seeds, carefully spacing them in neat rows and ensuring each one had the proper care. He commented softly on her attention to detail, and she felt a swell of pride. She realized that she was capable of nurturing life, not just surviving it. This simple act of planting seeds became a metaphor for her own growth. With care, patience, and effort, she could cultivate a future full of promise. The bond between them had deepened further. They shared meals, laughter, and quiet moments by the fire. Their conversations had grown more meaningful, moving beyond simple exchanges about food or chores. They discussed dreams, values, and hopes for the future. The woman found herself opening up more freely, sharing her thoughts and feelings without fear. She had learned that vulnerability did not make her weak. It made her human, and it allowed her to connect with another person in a genuine and meaningful way. As the days turned into weeks, she noticed a change in how she saw herself. She no longer thought of herself as broken or helpless. She recognized her resilience, her intelligence, and her capacity for growth. She began to set small, personal goals, to learn a new skill, to prepare a meal entirely on her own, to explore the forest beyond the cabin. Each goal, no matter how modest, became a step towards self-reliance and empowerment. One morning, she decided to explore the forest beyond the cabin. She put on her warm clothes, packed a small lunch, and set out with cautious excitement. The snow crunched under her boots, and the crisp air filled her lungs with life. She moved with confidence, her steps no longer hesitant. Each tree she passed, each bird she spotted, reminded her of the vastness and beauty of the world. She realized that the forest, once a symbol of fear and isolation, was now a place of exploration and discovery. During her walks, she reflected on her journey. She thought about the hardships she had faced, the moments of fear and despair, and the strength it had taken to reach this point. She realized that she had grown in ways she could not have imagined. Her past experiences, though painful, had taught her resilience, courage, and determination. And now, she could use those lessons to build a life that was meaningful and full of purpose. Back at the cabin, she began to take on more responsibilities. She learned to preserve food for the winter, mend clothing, and care for the small animals that lived nearby. Each task reinforced her independence and reminded her that she was capable of managing her life. The man, while offering guidance, encouraged her autonomy, letting her make decisions and learn from her experiences. This freedom was empowering, and she felt a deep sense of satisfaction in her ability to take charge of her own life. She also began to engage in creative activities. She painted simple pictures inspired by the forest, wrote reflections in her notebook, and even experimented with cooking new recipes. These activities brought joy and fulfillment, helping her reconnect with parts of herself that had been lost. She discovered that creativity was not just a hobby, it was a form of expression, a way to process emotions and a source of inner strength. Her emotional resilience grew as she continued to heal. She learned to manage stress, to face challenges without fear, and to respond to difficulties with calm determination. She recognized that setbacks were a natural part of life, not a reflection of weakness. This understanding gave her confidence and a sense of control over her own destiny. She no longer felt at the mercy of circumstances. She knew she had the strength to face whatever came her way. The relationship between her and the man evolved into one of mutual respect and trust. They shared quiet moments, supported each other's efforts, and celebrated small victories together. She realized that healthy relationships were built on respect, communication, and care, not on power or control. This realization was empowering, teaching her that she could form meaningful connections without losing her independence or sense of self. One evening, as they sat by the fire, she reflected on her transformation. She had come to the cabin frightened, broken, and unsure of herself. Now she was strong, independent, and confident. She had learned practical skills, nurtured her emotional resilience, and discovered her capacity for growth and creativity. Most importantly, she had learned to trust again, not just in others, but in herself. The man noticed her thoughtful expression and asked gently if she was all right. She smiled and nodded, realizing that she had reached a point where she could articulate her feelings and reflect on her journey. She shared some of her thoughts, speaking of gratitude, hope, and the desire to continue growing. He listened attentively, reinforcing the idea that her voice and her choices mattered. This recognition further strengthened her confidence and sense of self-worth. As winter continued, the woman began to imagine a life beyond the cabin. She dreamed of exploring the world, learning new things, and building a life filled with purpose and fulfillment. These dreams, once distant and unimaginable, now felt attainable. She understood that her past hardships had not defined her. They had shaped her, prepared her, and given her the tools to create a better future. She also realized that the cabin was more than just a place of refuge. It had become a classroom, a sanctuary, and a symbol of transformation. The fire that had warmed her body now symbolized the warmth and resilience that had returned to her spirit. The simple routines of daily life had taught her discipline, independence, and creativity. And the quiet companionship of the man had shown her the power of kindness, patience, and trust. By the end of this period, she had fully embraced her transformation. She was no longer the frightened, broken woman who had stumbled through the snow. She was strong, capable, and independent. She had learned to care for herself, to nurture her mind and spirit, and to trust in her own abilities. The cabin, the man, and the experiences she had undergone had all contributed to a profound shift in her life. She now faced the future with hope and determination. She knew that challenges would come, but she was confident in her ability to handle them. She had discovered inner strength, resilience, and the power of trust and kindness. And she understood that life, even after hardship, could be beautiful, fulfilling, and full of opportunities for growth. The woman had risen from fear, pain, and helplessness to embrace a life of independence, confidence, and hope. She had learned that healing was possible, that trust could be rebuilt, and that strength came not just from surviving, but from growing, learning, and believing in oneself. The journey had been difficult, but it had also been transformative, preparing her for the next chapter of her life. A chapter filled with possibility, courage, and the promise of a brighter future. The woman awoke to a crisp morning, feeling a sense of calm and confidence she had never known before. The cabin, once a refuge from despair, had become her home, a place where she had learned to grow, to heal, and to believe in herself again. The snow outside sparkled in the sunlight, but inside there was warmth not only from the fire, but from the strength and hope that now filled her heart. She realized that she was no longer merely surviving. She was living, thriving, and ready to embrace life fully. Her days were now filled with purpose and routine, but unlike before, every action was chosen by her, guided by her own will and judgment. She tended to the cabin, the garden, and the small animals nearby with care and pride. She cooked meals that were both nourishing and creative, experimenting with flavors and techniques she had once only dreamed of trying. The simple tasks that had once been chores had now become sources of joy, reminding her that life's smallest actions could bring the greatest satisfaction. The man continued to be a supportive presence, but their relationship had evolved into one of mutual respect and equality. They no longer spoke only in cautious tones. Their conversations were open, warm, and honest. They shared stories, laughter, and dreams for the future. He celebrated her successes with genuine delight and offered guidance only when asked. She realized that he had been a teacher, a mentor, and a friend, but most importantly, he had given her the space to discover her own strength. One morning, she stood at the edge of the forest, looking out over the vast, snowy landscape. The wind was cold, but it no longer felt threatening. Instead, it felt invigorating, filling her with energy and determination. She thought back to the day she had crawled through the snow, exhausted, frightened, and uncertain of her future. The memory was painful, but it also reminded her of how far she had come. She had emerged from fear and despair into a life filled with hope, independence, and purpose. With a renewed sense of confidence, she began to take on more ambitious tasks. She repaired parts of the cabin that had needed attention, strengthened the garden beds for the coming seasons, and even ventured further into the forest to collect resources. Each new challenge reinforced her belief in her own capabilities. She discovered that she could handle difficulties with calm and determination, and that she possessed a resilience that could not be taken away. Her emotional growth continued as she reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had faced extreme hardships, and yet she had survived and thrived. She realized that life was not defined by the struggles she had endured, but by the strength, courage, and perseverance she had shown in overcoming them. This understanding filled her with a profound sense of pride and dignity. She had reclaimed her life, not as a victim, but as a strong, capable, and self-reliant woman. The cabin became more than just a home. It became a symbol of her transformation. Each corner, each shelf, each small detail reflected her care and effort. She decorated it with simple touches that brought beauty and comfort, making it a place where she could rest, reflect, and grow. Every meal she prepared, every chore she completed, and every moment spent in the cabin was a celebration of her independence and her ability to thrive. She also began to plan for the future, thinking beyond the confines of the cabin. She imagined learning new skills, exploring new places, and building a life that was fulfilling in every way. These dreams were no longer distant or impossible. They were attainable because she now had the strength, confidence, and resilience to pursue them. She understood that life offered opportunities to grow, to learn, and to experience joy even after moments of profound hardship. Her relationship with the man also matured into one of deep trust and mutual understanding. They had shared experiences, challenges, and quiet moments that had formed a strong bond between them. She valued his wisdom, his kindness, and his patience, but she also understood that her life and her happiness were now in her own hands. This balance of support and independence was empowering, teaching her that true connection comes from respect, care, and equality. One evening, as the fire crackled warmly in the cabin, she sat quietly, reflecting on her journey. She thought about the cold, the fear, and the exhaustion she had endured. She remembered the moment she had first arrived at the cabin, broken and uncertain. And she smiled, knowing that she had not only survived, but had grown, healed, and flourished. She had learned to trust, to hope, and to believe in herself once again. She realized that living like a queen was not about wealth, luxury, or status. It was about self-respect, confidence, and the ability to create a life of dignity and purpose. She had learned to care for herself, to nurture her mind and body, and to embrace the possibilities of each day. Her strength, resilience, and courage had made her a queen of her own life, a life she had fought to reclaim and was determined to cherish. With this newfound perspective, she began to set new goals. She wanted to explore the world beyond the cabin, learn new skills, and help others who might be struggling. She understood that her journey had given her knowledge and empathy that could be shared, and she felt a responsibility to use her experience to inspire and support others. This sense of purpose brought her joy and fulfillment, reinforcing the idea that her life had meaning beyond mere survival. As winter slowly gave way to spring, she witnessed the first signs of new life in the forest and the garden. Buds appeared on trees, shoots emerged from the soil, and birds returned to fill the air with song. These signs of renewal mirrored her own transformation. She felt connected to the cycles of life around her, understanding that growth often comes after periods of hardship. She embraced this connection, finding peace and inspiration in the natural world. Her confidence and self-reliance were evident in every action. She moved with grace and purpose, handled challenges calmly, and approached each day with determination. She no longer feared the unknown or doubted her abilities. Instead, she faced life with courage, optimism, and the knowledge that she had the power to shape her own destiny. The lessons she had learned in the cabin, resilience, trust, patience, and compassion, guided her decisions and actions. The man continued to support her, but she no longer depended on him for guidance in every decision. She had grown into her own person, capable of independent thought and action. Their relationship was now one of partnership and mutual respect, each valuing the other's presence while maintaining personal strength and autonomy. She understood that true strength came from self-belief, and true connection came from respect and trust. One afternoon, she decided to prepare a special meal, using the skills she had learned and the ingredients she had nurtured in the garden. She cooked with care, arranging each dish with attention to detail. When the man arrived, he was impressed by her skill, creativity, and confidence. They enjoyed the meal together, laughing, sharing stories, and celebrating the simple joys of life. In that moment, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment and fulfillment, knowing that she had truly reclaimed her life. She also began to envision ways to continue growing, both personally and in her connection with the world. She thought about learning new skills, helping neighbors, and sharing her experiences to inspire others. She understood that life was a journey of continuous growth, and she was ready to embrace it fully. Each day brought new opportunities, and she faced them with courage, wisdom, and hope. By the time spring was in full bloom, she had transformed completely. The woman who had once crawled through the snow, cold, broken, and fearful, was now strong, confident, and independent. She had learned to live with dignity, to trust again, and to embrace life with courage and joy. Her journey had been long and difficult, but it had also been transformative, preparing her to live fully and purposefully. She understood that the hardships she had endured had not defined her. They had shaped her into a resilient, courageous, and capable person. She had learned to rely on herself, to trust others wisely, and to create a life filled with meaning, joy, and fulfillment. She had discovered that living like a queen was not about wealth or luxury, but about strength, dignity, and the ability to embrace life on her own terms. The cabin, once a place of refuge, had become a symbol of her journey and transformation. Every corner reflected her care, effort, and creativity. Every meal, chore, and act of kindness reinforced her independence and self-worth. She had reclaimed her life, not as a passive survivor, but as an empowered, confident, and self-reliant woman. As she stood by the window one morning, looking at the forest and the bright sky, she smiled. The journey had been long, the challenges great, but she had emerged stronger, wiser, and full of hope. She had faced darkness and emerged into light, turning survival into thriving, fear into courage, and despair into joy. She had learned the true meaning of resilience, trust, and self-respect. And so the woman lived fully, embracing each day with gratitude, confidence, and hope. She had learned to value herself, to nurture her body and mind, and to trust in her own strength. Life, once a struggle, had become a journey of growth, purpose, and fulfillment. She had transformed from a frightened survivor into a queen of her own life, empowered, independent, and ready to embrace the future with courage and joy.